Hey friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and the last two videos I did, I was showcasing a Rosenwald deck. And today I thought I would compare three other Rosenwalds that I have with the most recent acquisition that I have, because I think it's always very interesting to see how different deck creators made different choices when recreating a deck. And I thought I had only had two other Rosenwalds, but I forgot that I had two from Marco Benedetti. I have been following and purchasing decks from Marco Benedetti since he was creating decks on Make Playing Cards, and I think later on Game Crafter. And of course, in more recent years, he's switched over to create his own decks, the manufacture of his own decks. So he no longer uses those outlets. I don't know if those decks might still be available if someone's interested. I don't know. But I'm certainly delighted to have Marco's more recent recreations done more by his own hand. Then I also have, aside from the artisan that I showcased a few days ago, I also have one from Sullivan Hisman's, and I've shown that one a number of occasions. Today I'm just going to showcase the Triumph cards. Now, another thing, I wasn't clever enough to write down the order that the cards appeared on the sheet. And I should have done it when I received my last, I should have done it when I received any of these Rosenwald decks, because now I don't know what order they were on the sheet. We do know for a fact that the Fool card was not part of the canon. Now, either they, morphed the Magician and the Fool as to be one card, or maybe it was missing, and it was just didn't happen to be on those sheets. Remember, the only reason we have the Rosenwald deck at all is because it was used to pad a book that was published in 1501 in Perugia, Italy, which is in the region between where Rome is and where Florence is. I know Florence, I think, is in Tuscany. One of them is, I don't know. I don't want to, well, let's look at the map so I don't speak. Okay. Perugia is in the region between Tuscany and Lazio, okay? And that's where Florence and Rome are. And it does seem to have Florentine influences, but Perugia isn't that far from Rome, so it might be, normal that it might have had Florentine influences. And it is known that since 1482, Perugia had been manufacturing cards. So it's possible that the same place that produced the book or published the book maybe had also published the decks of cards. So it's possible that it wasn't really, that the deck wasn't really from Florence, but was influenced by Florentine style, since Perugia was not that far. I hope that all made sense. Now, before I flip the camera, I'm still having glitch issues with my camera, my phone. I don't know what's going on. It seems like in this direction, it's fine. When I flip it, it skips a lot. I'm just saying. So I don't know what I can do about it. My memory is good. My storage is good. I only have like 20% because after I do videos, I put them elsewhere. So I don't know what's going on. At any rate, bear with me, and if it gets too bad, I'll abandon it and try again another day, but it's been glitching for about a week now. Okay, I'm going to try to not put my fingers in the image, because every time I put my finger in, it tends to glitch. Oh, and now it'll make a liar out of me. From left to right, I have the Rosenwald by Sullivan Hisman's. I have Artisan Tarots, and I have two from Marco. Remember, this one is from the days when he did Game Crafter and Make Playing Cards, and then this one when Marco created it himself. Now, I'm starting the order with the Fool card, which, as I mentioned, was not part of the Rosenwald canon. So here are the decisions made, there it goes, by each of the artists or the publishers, right? And Marco's did not change very much between the two, so I'm not going to show that one. So here, isn't this interesting? Now, Sullivan is the only one who opted more for like a fool's hat, but with donkey ears, and possibly those things coming out might have been referencing feathers. I don't know. Artisans and Marco's both seem to be in agreement with some feather type thing coming out of his head. Marco's has a bear behind. Sullivan's is more like the Estensi, which is low, and we see the hair, but not quite obscene. And the artisan deck, he's disheveled, but there's nothing about the rear end or anything being exposed. In all three, he's got some kind of staff. But in the Sullivan Hissmans, we've got the reference to the innkeeper and the fool, which is a classic play that I've discussed in many videos, when the fool has a staff with his image in it. I think I've discussed it at length when I've discussed the Noble. Let me pull a book where, if you really, really, really want to know more about this, I'll lead you to the source. I won't spell it out completely because then it'll be a video into itself, and I've already done that video, but I'll show you the book. Alrighty, here is the book. Con gli occhi et con, well, in English it says Explaining the Tarot in 16th Century Italy. And I have bookmarked around here, 14, 15, maybe 16. So I think it was around those pages where it discussed what I'm talking about. So this is a great source. Okay. It's a fascinating read, at any rate. Also, let's see. There's something about the socks in all of them, the stockings. The only one that has a satchel is the one done by Artisan. The other two don't appear to have a satchel. And the only one that has an animal is Sullivan Hissman's. Now, Marco's has a border, and I don't think so much that this is representing a border per se, although it is a border, but I think it's because when, Marco might have been, because the back of this one, Marco decided to put this type of design on the back of it. And in those days, to make cards, the way they made cards is they often folded over the back paper over the front, and then it created a kind of border that matched whatever was on the back. Now, I do believe that the original backs were just plain. The decks that have survived, I think they were just the backs. Now, remember, they were rejected sheets, so there was something about the Rosenwald copy that we have that was in the book only because it was a rejected copy. So there was something about it that maybe it was printed up, not up to snuff. It could have been because there were irregularities in the numbering. I'm not really sure but there are enough cards that were in reverse. Their numbers were reversed, that it could have just been because of the reversal of numbers. But anyway, this could also, in the Rosenwald that Marco did, with the copy I have, and I know he's got other copies of the Rosenwald. This was just the one that I purchased when it came out. And I believe that you can get the Rosenwald by Marco where the paper actually is folded over, but I don't happen to have that copy. But I think that Marco had made a decision to emulate that in this particular copy. Anyway, that's why this deck throughout will have a border. Okay, now, here is the magician that came to us. And you'll notice that Sullivan Hissman decided to flip the image because there's a deck in Germany that shows what is believed to have been the correct orientation, which was the numbers showing properly. And so if a few of the numbers are reversed, then it stands to reason that everything on that sheet would have been printed in reverse. So Sullivan-Hissman's will be opposite of the others because he made the decision to print it opposite. Now, because there are irregularities in the numbering, I suspect that was the reason why Marco decided to eliminate the numbers just for us, because we could put them in whatever order we saw fit. I mean, I can't speak for Marco, but that's what I suspect. Also notice that Marco did take liberties in changing the color in these two. Remember, when you don't have color, when a sheet is printed, the next step would be to color it, right? So we don't know what the colors choices would have been in the original deck because we don't have it. And Marco's decks are two decks that show color choices. Whereas Sullivan-Hissman in this particular deck and Artisan Tarot in their deck chose to leave them not in color, the way they came to us. However, I do believe that Sullivan-Hissman's does have a variety of Rosenwald that he did show in color. I think I have like an older one, I think, but I don't know. Okay, we're glitching. Oh, we're glitching. Here we have the female Pope. Again, Sullivan-Hissman's reversed it. And it's subtle. It's a subtle thing because she's looking straight at us, but we can tell by the key and where the number occurs. And Marco, as I mentioned, removed the numbers, but his seems to be glancing in the direction of Sullivan-Hissman's. And his key is in the same location as Sullivan. So it looks like Marco did switch, did the reversal, whereas Artisan Tarot produced it as it came to us. So Artisan's is more a facsimile. Now, as far as the faces go, I've noticed that consistently in the Rosenwald deck by Sullivan-Hissman's, that it seems like he prettied up a lot of the faces. Like the faces are more genteel. In at least the one that I have. I don't know if he made any later decks of the Rosenwald, what he did. Also, I noticed that, I don't know if this is an attempt by him to age the paper to make it look authentic as it might have looked that, in an old sheet. So I don't know. It may have been artificially aged. I'm not really sure, and I can't speak on that. So here we have the Empress, number 3. And when I mentioned the Florentine influence, those like cobweb kind of things in the corners. And I think we'll notice it also to some degree in the virtues, the virtue cards. Now, there isn't really any change here between these two cards. So, it's interesting because sometimes color can affect a reading, right? If we do a spread and there's an abundance of red or an abundance of yellow, right? You might not be able to help but notice, oh my goodness, look at all that yellow. What does that suggest? And that could be part of the reading, or the pattern of how one yellow card bleeds into another yellow, right? I'm just using that as an example. And then it might be like, well, look at the direction of the color flow. I mean, that would be a legitimate way to interpret the cards, or one way to follow the flow, especially if you're having a hard time following the flow, right? Just look where your eye takes you. But when you have, cards without color, you're just really looking at the image, and then whatever clues, that you would get. And sometimes, it could be argued sometimes that color is a distraction. But they all had color for the most part. I mean, I'm sure this deck, when it was originally created, was meant to have color. As I mentioned a few times, the only reason we have the sheet at all is because it was a reject, so they didn't bother to color it. Here we have the Emperor, and I do thank you for hanging in there with me, and I hope you stay with me because this is a very interesting deck, and Okay, Marco really didn't make any changes, so. Here we have, wow, this is very interesting. So Sullivan's Hissman's put a staff where there wasn't one. Isn't that interesting, though? The only thing Marco did to change his two versions was the one he made first, that make playing cards or whatever, is more maroon. And it became more red here. Isn't that interesting? So Sullivan Hissman's put in a staff. It wasn't in the original card. And I know that Artisan kept it the way it looked, but it looks like Marco differentiated that this was a collar and that this was the front, but it's not quite spelled out there, but both Marco and Sullivan Hissman seem to understand that that's, and then Sullivan Hissman's further put like a brooch there. Isn't that something? To keep his cloak closed. Well, that's very interesting. See, you may have a Rosenwald deck or you may have any other deck, right? But, the publishers will always make a choice, make a change perhaps, or just tweak something, or something might not be spelled out completely. And so maybe they make educated guesses about it. Okay, again, we have the 6 reversed because Sullivan Hissman's decided to reverse it to correct the number. I mean, obviously, the way we got it from the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., the copy we have in the Washington, D.C. is this one, where it's printed in the wrong direction. Let's see if these two are any different. Yeah, the maroon. So Marco made a few color changes between the two. He did, namely the red was originally maroon, and he gave different colored stockings. Okay, now we have 7. So the chariot in this region of Italy at this period of time was not number 7. Number 7 was temperance, and we've seen it in other decks. I can't recall what they were off the top of my head. And let's see what changes we have here with Marco. They're the same. And you see the scalloped halo. So the scalloping is not just in the corners of some of the cards, but it's also on the scalloped halo that we see. That many historians believe it came from Florence, but it's not so far from Florence that it wouldn't have been influenced by what was happening in Florence. And as I mentioned, it is known that there have been publishing cards in Perugia since 1482. So this is interesting to me because it could be like an optical illusion. On the one hand, it looks like the woman might be sitting and that these are her knees. But it also looks like she could be standing behind a bench that has she's probably sitting. But it also could look different depending on how you look at it. And then if you notice, both of these cards in sequence are 8. Oh, so okay, my bad. It's the next one, not that one. So here we have 8. And Marco's 2 cards don't seem to be much different except for the halo. Okay. And as I remember, Marco decided to take the numbers off so that we could put them in whatever order we wanted, since the numbering in the original decks are wonky. So we have 8 here for justice, but then notice we also have 8 for fortitude. And Marco's both decks seem not to have any difference, so I'm not going to show this one. I think the more movement I have in the camera, the more it gets glitchy. So we have 2 number 8s, which could have been another reason why it wasn't up to snuff, you know. Which the kid, you can't have 2 number 8s. Which one's number 8? So that could have been another reason, aside from the fact that they were printed in reverse too. And we have 10 in the form of the Chariot. And the Chariot doesn't seem to have varied much between Marco's 2 decks, so I'm only going to show one. Now the difference, you know, in the way that if you're reading this deck and you opt for a copy that reverse the images because that's the way it was intended to be, or if you decide to buy a true facsimile about where the actually happened, you know, the action is opposite, right? So the charioteer is looking in this direction, but his chariot's moving in that. But in the other cards, it's the opposite way. So pay attention, of course, not only just to color and where swords might be pointing or the look of where somebody's looking, but also where the horses are going or the action of the images. Now the wheel was one of those cards that was largely missing. I think it was like, okay, I'll use this because this is the way it came down to us. I think it was like this much was shown here, right? This much, and then maybe a snippet of something here, maybe, you know. So they basically had to imagine what was on the Wheel of Fortune based on the other cards of the period of time. And between Marco's, there's a color change. So all 3 of them, of course, are familiar with the Wheel of Fortune and historic decks, and they realize that there's 4 images, one going up, one coming down, one at the bottom. And I think that's interesting, but of course, depending on the one you purchase, if you're interested in getting a Rosenwald, in some, the wheel goes in one direction, and in the original, more, you know, the one that reproduces the deck as it came to us, rotates in another direction. So these, you know, are all things to keep in mind when you purchase a deck that has been published by various individuals. Here we have the Hermit, and he's not 9. We have him as what Sullivan Hismans indicates as 12. And I don't know if I have them, as I mentioned, in the right order that as it came off the sheet. I just guesstimated and put them in the same order. And there's no difference here. I don't see one anyway. And again, as I mentioned with the color, like the color yellow, for example. So if we were to, you know, read and we see an arc of blue and say the blue continued in another card, the color can, you know, influence your eye, how to follow the flow. And it might be something you're not doing consciously. Following the flow of color could just be something you're picking up subconsciously. You know, I mean, sometimes when I interpret cards, And I understand, the message. Sometimes, see, she's telling the truth. Sometimes, I follow a flow and I could be influenced by color without even realizing it. But most of the time, I am influenced by the direction something's moving. There are some slight changes between both of Marco's cards here. One, he changed which one is in blue and which one is in red, and then the maroon turned into bright red. Here we have the Hanged Man. Now, and there's no difference here, so I'm not going to bother with it. Now, interesting. I think that Marco and Sullivan Hismans might have understood that since this was a sack of coins, and they knew it was a sack of coins, they completed it. But it looks like it may have been missing from the wood block, because I know that Kristen Condor, who did the artisan one, traced it, right? So if it was missing on the original, it would be missing on hers. So she didn't make, the only changes or adaptations she made were in the Wheel of Fortune and creating a Fool card. So if there was a glitch in the card, she kept it, which I think is interesting. Because when you compare cards now, you get to see, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that maybe card makers decided to close up that coin pouch to make it look more like a pouch. Because here it almost looks like there's something going on with the wood, but we know intellectually that it's satchels of coin. And in their case, since it's a reversal, it would have been this satchel here. It would have been that one. Oh, isn't this, wait a minute, look at this. Now in this case, Marco didn't reverse the cards. Because in this instance, these two are the same. And Sullivan Hismans is the one that's odd man out. Isn't that interesting? Okay, the Grand Poobah from the Flintstones. I know that's sacrilege. Please forgive me for saying it. But this one always reminds me of like a Flintstone character. We have the devil. Again, the only difference between the devil between Marco's two is that the red. What about his feet? Were his feet red? No. So we have the bird-like feet. We have the pitchfork. We have the horns. He doesn't have wings. He's not a winged creature. That came later when he was given bat wings, right? Or the wings of darkness. He does not have the wings of virtue. In fact, he has no wings in this at all. But if you're doing a reading and you see this pitchfork, what card is over here and what's he pitching? Like what's he jabbing? It could be a card that's above it diagonally, right? What's he jabbing? These directional clues may help you, or even subconsciously influence your eye to follow the story. And this is why tarot is so wonderful for me. I just love tarot, obviously. I'm a person who has hundreds and hundreds of tarot decks. Most of them historic, but I have a few that are not historic. Well, all decks are historic, really, because they're all part of tarot history. You can look at it like that. Okay, now Marco didn't really change much in the color. So we have a celestial event hitting a tower. Or being the cause, perhaps, of a fire. Although, the suggestion here is that something from above has hit the tower. But we don't see a lightning bolt. And we do see flames coming from within. So maybe the action already happened and we're seeing it after the fact. And then, of course, with tarot, especially in the early Italian, it was the concept that was the big thing, So here we see it mostly in the celestial cards. It was the star that was the main attraction. It was the moon that was the main attraction. And interestingly, TDM, oops, I didn't show that, I'm sorry. These two look the same, so I'm not going to show it. So we have a front-facing moon. I mean, did TDM get the idea? I mean, this is from 1501. It certainly came long before any TDM that we're aware of. We have a front-facing moon. But the concept was the moon. This concept here is the sun. And you notice that after we get past a certain number, I guess after we get past, I don't know, maybe 12 or something like that, we don't see any more numbers. Okay, the sun is the same in both. And then we do know in this sheet, and I do remember, the only order I rightly remember that isn't numbered is that the world card was the penultimate card. So it did not come at the end. And it really makes sense. Somebody once challenged me, why wouldn't the world card come last? Like, how could you justify this? And if you look at it like, well, the world card in this fashion, the way it looks here, without the evangelists and all that, represents accomplishment on earth. We have, I'm sure, an affluent city represented here. Whatever town is producing the cards is probably representing their own town. And they're boasting probably the fact that they have towers, right? It was probably a feat of architectural wonder for a medieval town to have towers. And so they're showcasing their marvelous town that is on the top of the heap. They have towers on the hill, right? And they also have an angel. And the angel, what is in the angel has an orb, okay? The angel has an orb in its hands and a sword, no horn. Now remember, different regions were representing the concept in the way they saw fit. Some regions would have represented whatever image was they felt this was with a horn, an angel with a horn. And some did not. Some regions celebrated the world card at the end because it wasn't representing what you accomplished on earth. It represented what happened when you went and you died, right? Because they saw this card perhaps as suggesting you die. And then the world card is what happens after you die, right? In their decks. But here you accomplish your worldly, whatever you accomplish on this world, and then you're called to task because the judgment card suggests you got to face your maker. So I understand, and I like this order better, to be honest. I really like this order better because it makes more sense to me. Plus, I don't like the world card. My two least favorite cards in the TDM canon are the wheel card and the world card. I loathe those two cards. They're like, they lack imagination. And that's one of the reasons why I love the Italian cards, because they tend, especially if you catch it early enough, right? They tend to have the world card not as the evangelistic thing, the ascension of Christ or whatever. It's more like this is what you accomplished on earth. And then after that, you're being called from the dead to atone, or not atone, but to be held accountable. So let me flip the camera quickly. So I hope you enjoyed that. I am endlessly fascinated by tarot, obviously. I obviously am. And anytime I get a new deck, I always will compare it to other decks that I have. I'll always use it in readings to show you how it reads. And here we had the benefit of having a deck in color, the same deck in color, and how color can influence your eye without you even knowing it. Again, check this book out. I don't know where I got it. I don't know when I got it. But it's worth finding if you can, just for that one little thing alone. And there's a lot of cool things that are in this book. If you haven't already subscribed, please do me that honor. And if you forgot to like and you find value, if you're watching this long, it's obvious that you found value in my video. So please give me a thumbs up, okay? Until next time, friends, peace, stay well, and be kind.